Maureen Reintjes is from Mission, Kansas. No, she's not missing. In fact, Maureen is highly visible as a volunteer, advocate, and coordinator in the missing persons community in the Midwest United States. Today you get to hear Maureen talk about her knowledge, what got her involved, and how you can get involved too. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. Last week's Volume 4 update episode, you should have seen this coming. I was dead serious in my opening when I said that I want all of you to consider getting more involved in the missing persons community in 2020. But I'm not a dictator. I'm not the general and you aren't enlisted soldiers. I'm not the cult leader and I'd never want anyone to drink the Kool-Aid. Instead, and to put it the way Mike Tomlin, coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, might say it, the community needs volunteers, not hostages. People who sign up, who aren't drafted. Human beings who want to be here, not because it's some type of requirement. Well, for me, if that's what I believe, and I do believe that, my job is to introduce you to people who were once like you. On the outside, going about their lives, knowing about missing persons cases, taking an interest in them, but experiencing them from a distance. Then for them, something changed. In fact, their whole world changed. Well, today you're going to hear from a person like that, and I hope she can give you the inspiration, the courage, and the knowledge on how to get more involved in 2020. There is no case for today, so I will simply go through Maureen's resume at this time. She has a BA in Management and Human Relations. She has a master's degree in psychology, and she got that in 2018. She got her certificate in Amber Alert training in 2017. She was a promoter/administrator for Billy's Law during the 115th Congress. She is a volunteer victims advocate for NamUs in Kansas. She is the executive director of communications for Missouri Missing, and she is also a certified instructor at the Alice Training Institute. Unfound News. I've added a new person to the Unfound team over the past week. Yes, that means I now have another assistant. How many is that now? Natasha is her name, and she'll be working on refurbishing and managing the website, which certainly needs it, along with maximizing the potential of the Unfound podcast channel on YouTube. I'm certainly happy to have her on board. Next, some stats from Facebook regarding the Unfound discussion group and page. The group added over 4,400 members during 2019. We now have about 6,700 people in there. And we only blocked 16 people for the entire year. That's it. 16. The Unfound page, 5,700 likes during 2019. That brings its total to about 7,200. Those are both outstanding numbers for both the group and the page. Thank you so much. Finally, 2019 was a great year for myself and Unfound. I hope it continues in 2020, and I hope you all have a wonderful year as well. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, and Facebook. On Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, please join us on YouTube for the Unfound live show. Contribute to Unfound at patreon.com/unfoundpodcast. This week I need to thank KB and Kim. You can also contribute at PayPal, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. That is also the email address. Merchandise. The book's on Amazon.com in both ebook and print form. Do not forget the reviews. Shirts at unfound-podcast.myshopify.com. Cards at makeplayingcards.com/sell/unfoundpodcast. And please mention Unfound at all true crime websites and forums. Thank you. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound, Maureen Reintjes. Maureen, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Let's just start here. As I've already set up in the intro before this interview, you are an advocate. You've been involved in getting laws passed. You're communications director. You have a long list of let's just put it this way. Your resume is very long in the missing persons community. You've done a lot over the last 14 years, but let's just start here. Where are you from? What's your background, your education? Those general qualities first.
Okay, that sounds fair. My education, I have a master's in psychology that I just attained about a year ago. I'm a communication specialist. I am the executive director of communication for Missouri Missing, which is a 501c3 based out of Jeff City, Missouri. I am a nameless victim advocate. I went through their academy back in 2010. My day job, I am a resource specialist. I'm also the Verdus coordinator, which is Protecting God's Children coordinator for the parish that I work in.
Okay.
I also am the founder of Kansas City Metro Networking Job Club. I have over 5,000 members that that are in my group. I have been facilitating job clubs since the 90s.
Wow.
Lots of different hats. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Sounds like you're a busy person, Maureen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, for sure.
I know the feeling. Where are you, if you can say, where are you originally from? Where did you grow up? And
I grew up in the Kansas City metro area on the Kansas side in Johnson County, Kansas. I currently live in Mission, Kansas. I have lived in Las Vegas, Nevada, and Scottsdale, Arizona, and moved back here.
Okay. And I'm sure some of the listeners are going to say, oh, you lived in Las Vegas, because many of them know that for a time, for about 13 years, I lived there as well. In fact, I still have a 702 phone number for my cell phone that I use for these interviews. Okay, so that's your education, what you're doing right now, and of course we're going to get a little bit deeper into that, some of these things that you've been doing over the last 14 years. But I do have to ask you this, and you can say as much as you'd like. How did you get involved in the missing persons community?
It was May 19th, 2005, when my husband went missing from Las Vegas. That is when it began, and then it just kind of evolved from there. I went through the Nameless Academy. I was put forward and got scholarship to the Fox Technical College Missing and Unidentified Persons Training Conference. I've been through the Amber Alert training. And basically, I've just been here for other families and just a way to pay back the people that were there for me in the beginning, too.
When it happened to you. When this happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Let's start here as far as you getting into the community. If I would have encountered you, let's say, in, 2002, before you got involved, of course, I've only been involved in this since 2016, but let's just say that I was involved back then, and I would have asked you about missing persons in the United States and, how police get involved and everything. What do you think you would have said back then? Of course, you're very educated and experienced now, but maybe back in 2002, before you got involved, what do you think that you would have said?
I would have known only what I'd seen on TV. I think I did know. I think most of us probably were aware of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We didn't, at that time I didn't even really think about adults going missing. I would have thought there was a wait period, which I did think there was a wait period to call when your loved one goes missing. I would have thought the detectives take over the case and they go out and they solve it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that the families become the investigators.
That's certainly true. It's certainly true. So I'm guessing then when this happened to you and then you got involved, it was quite a wake-up call. Kind of a...
Extremely.
Just nothing...
Extremely.
I'm guessing nothing that you could have ever predicted. That how things are... The perception and the reality are two very different things.
Very true. And I had skills going into it that kind of helped me understand quickly what was going on, between research skills and being able to get out in front of the news cameras and things like that. I had already had that experience, but not in the world of the missing. So I kind of had one little bit leg up than many of these families have.
Mm-hmm. And still, it was a shock to you.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I had no idea. I didn't even know what the NCIC was. I had no idea, what protocols were, or I thought protocols were in place that weren't in place. It was mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm. You look back at it now. You said you only know what you know on TV, and I know the listeners are probably saying that that's something that comes up probably on my YouTube live show, not necessarily during the episodes, but during the live show. That I think because of TV, because of the fiction TV shows and things, people get a very erroneous idea about how crimes are solved or missing persons cases are solved. It's just not very realistic. Do you think that that's maybe the reason that you had a misconception, or was it something else?
No, I think that definitely played the biggest part.
Okay. Well, then once you got involved, 2005 was the pivotal year, and 2006 and 2007. What then did you discover? Let's just talk about the public. You were just one of the public at one time, and then you became involved in the missing persons community. What do you think, the public needs to know? Just your average person, maybe as somebody like you, before 2005 came around. How would you approach somebody these days? Somebody who knows nothing about missing persons cases or anything. What can you say about that?
I would tell them to, yes, involved. I mean, if that's an interest, a certain case takes an interest to you, do all your research, read up on it, but be careful. Know that the families own their cases and nobody else does, and that anything you do should be going through the families. You shouldn't be calling law enforcement on your own unless you have a tip. You shouldn't be calling law enforcement on your own to ask some crazy question, that's probably been answered already. Let the families give them the permission. Let them give you the permission to call the police if you so desire to,
Mm-hmm. Okay. And let's move on to this. Maybe then, kind of from the public to the next P, the police. What did you discover about the police in those those early days or in the early years, 2006, 2007, in contrast to what you thought before? What did you discover regarding the police?
I discovered quite a bit. I had a very nice detective. He was a good man. He is a good man. But I didn't know what questions to ask. I didn't know the system, so I really didn't know what to be asking whatsoever. It was early on. Kelly Jokowski got a hold of me, and she asked me for the NCIC number, and I'm like, NCIC, what? What are you talking about, And she explained it to me, and so I called my detective and said, hey, is there an NCIC number? And he said, hold on, I'll get back to you in a couple hours. So obviously he had not entered my husband into the NCIC. But once the question was asked, then he did what he was supposed to be doing, and he did get back to me with the number.
Did you find would you say that you found initially that maybe the police departments, of course you're just dealing with one in particular, but maybe as you got to know about other police departments, other families, etc., that police don't know as much about missing persons cases as the public thinks?
That is very true. It all depends on the police department. It depends on the police officer, the detectives themselves, too. It depends on how much training they've gotten, because they get very little in academy, if anything, on the missing. And, if their agency is not being proactive in getting their detectives out to, the various training classes, then they're getting nothing. But even when they go out to the training classes, not all of them involve the families of the missing. They're not getting that side of it, what the families are facing as they're going through it.
Okay.
And I ran into good cops. Oh my God, all across the nation that reached out and helped me. I think you either have a knack for it or you don't. You have the empathy for it or you don't. Some detectives are just there doing their job, and that's all they're doing. And with the missing, it's hard because they may not get the case solved during their tenure, and so it's not not the sweet place to be for a lot of these detectives.
Right. We'll come back. We're going to come back to the public and the police. We're going to break these down a little bit more a little later in this interview, but let me move on to this. What about missing persons families? What did you think you knew before, of course, you got involved, and then, of course, once you got involved, of course, if you met Kelly Murphy, then, of course, you know about her son disappearing. How did your perception change with them, you think, from before to after?
I had never really considered the families that much, other than, I feel sorry for them. I hope they, find their missing loved one, but never really thought much past what goes on a day-to-day basis for, days, months, years, or decades. It was a real eye-opener. Back in 2005, that was before Facebook, and so a lot of the families, we all met up on MySpace. And it was kind of crazy how many of us met up and are still very, very close friends, to this day. I had no idea there were so many people out there. I had no idea that there were so many people with loved ones who were adults that were missing.
Right. And we've talked about that, and I think we'll touch upon that in a bit. So you got to meet these other families, and you didn't realize, what I think I've discovered over the last 3+ years. It's a very tight knit community. Everybody seems to know everybody else. At least those families. Of course, there are many families that, just to put it one way, kind of move on. They kind of accept the person, after 20, 30 years. But those families that are engaged all the time, they all seem to know each other.
We do.
Yeah.
We do. We've all reached out, and we all refer each other to each other,
Yeah.
Like the spouses of the missing, we're kind of our own little group, so that, we encounter them talking with, other families that may have a child missing or something, or, a daughter or son missing or something. Well, they, hey, did you know that there are so many other spouses that have, their loved one missing?
Sure.
You might want to talk with so-and-so.
Sure. Right. And I know just with my work with Unfound for the last 3+ years is that I will interview a family member, and then they will say to me, well, you need to talk to this person over here who I also know who has lost a loved one. And at least I'm going to say at least 10% of the people that I've had on the program came to me from other guests because they all know each other, so.
That's right.
And let me just finish this for this section of this interview. You're also, as the listeners will eventually find out, you've also gotten involved in getting laws passed. How would you then say the difference between before and after regarding the law? And what I mean by that is both between like prosecutors, district attorneys who are responsible for maybe bringing some of these disappearance cases to a jury, the whole way up to getting laws passed, your perceptions regarding all of that.
I think, well, first I'm going to start off with we never did get the law passed, but we got it all the way to the Senate, the U.S. Senate, until one senator denied us. But I did learn the process. I learned the federal process. And this is Billy's law I'm talking about. Now we're going state by state with it. So I'm learning the state process, who you go to, how you get this done, type of thing. I'm not sure I'm understanding your question on the prosecutors.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is that maybe it's not, necessarily relevant for, the situation you've been involved personally, but a topic that came up, for example, when I had Tad Tobias on the program is maybe prosecutors who are a little too hesitant to bring missing persons cases to a jury because, of course, in missing persons cases, there's no body. Tad Tobias talked about how, some prosecutors don't want to ruin their perfect prosecution record of, 100%. Have you ever encountered any of that in your work?
Well, luckily, I live in Kansas, and we have Jennifer, Christine Rush, and Teresa Brown, who have been missing since 1989, and their killer was convicted. I think it depends on the area you're living in, the politics involved. They did have a lot on the guy that convicted. His name is Richard Grissom. So, it wasn't such a crapshoot to go after him with the body still not being found. Okay.
Well, that's good to hear.
But in other cases, I could see in other areas, it just depends where you're from, who the prosecutor is, how much evidence they have.
Sure. Right.
And you don't have to go to trial. The families don't want it to go to trial until they can get a conviction. They don't want it tossed out as a mistrial or, double jeopardy or something along those lines.
Yes. Okay. All right. Let's move on to this now. Regarding the public, we've already talked about it in general. What do you think the biggest misconception the public has about missing persons cases and how they are investigated? Maybe just frankly, what do you think the public gets the most wrong as far as their perception is, looking in from the outside?
They get a lot wrong because they don't know the system. We have a lot of people weighing in on these cases, and it's great that they're enthusiastic, but they really need to sit down and look at what their state laws are, look at the protocols in their police forces that they're dealing with, and pretty much, they need to know the system. I think the public, most of the public, they're not really getting heavily involved in the cases, think, well, the police are handling it. And they don't realize that many times that's not it. It's actually the families out there solving these cases, going out and finding their loved ones.
That's certainly true. That is certainly true, especially after a certain period of time. As disappearances get older, that is certainly true. And I know that I try to help my guests as much as I can with my experience. Of course, my experience is much less than yours, but trying to give my own, opinions and insights from other cases, because as I've tried to tell them, at some point you're probably going to be doing this on your own. So okay.
That's true. And we really don't, police need to see that we really don't want these families going out and finding their loved ones if they're deceased. That shouldn't be it. They shouldn't have to be the ones to find the remains.
Yeah. Right. It's traumatic enough as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It is.
Okay. Let's move on to the police again. We had talked about this once again. As the listeners know, I usually talk to guests a couple times before we record an interview. Why is it why do we hear so much about police not taking adult missing persons cases seriously? And why does this happen? Why do we hear so much more about children going missing and police, of course, jumping in with both feet, in contrast to maybe even teenagers and, of course, adults? Why does this happen, do you think? Now, you've had a chance to look at this for 14 years. What do you think?
Well, I think everybody is always naturally going to be more worried about a child. I mean, a child is defenseless out there. But then sometimes many of our adults and teenagers are defenseless out there, too. Every case should be taken seriously from the get-go, and they should always play to the worst-case scenario and rejoice if,
right,
if it's the best-case scenario, but they can save lives if they jump on it right away and play to the worst-case scenario.
Right. Right, and of course, as I think a lot of listeners now know, is that do you think, maybe I should ask you this, do you think the police play up that, well, adults can just walk out of their lives anytime they want? Do you think that they maybe use that excuse a little too much?
Extremely too much. Extremely too much. And they're doing it for teenagers, too, which is just totally ridiculous and wrong. Nobody voluntarily vacates their life. Always they're either mentally ill, physically ill, an accident has occurred, like where they've ran off the road or something and can't be found, or they've done something criminal or something criminal's been done to them. A sane, healthy, non-criminal doesn't vacate their life. And they need to understand that. The law enforcement.
Okay. Let's move on to this. This is something that I brought up. I think it's a fascinating topic. It's what I kind of call a paradox. You and I both know that among the public, even though the public may not understand missing persons cases like you and I do, the public, there's a reason that for example, the TV show Disappeared has been on for many, many years. There's a reason that of course, this program, Unfound, has, thousands and thousands of listeners. There's other, of course, missing persons programs that are popular as well. Obviously, missing persons cases and people taking an interest in them exists. On the other hand, why do you think it is, as you've talked about, and of course I've known about this too, is that missing persons departments is considered to be like the lowest of the low, and in fact, if a police officer has moved into that department, it's almost considered like a demotion. So it's this perception that among the public, missing persons cases are somewhat interesting, but among police, it's the opposite. Why do you perceive it that same way? And if so, why do you think that is?
I do perceive it that way, and many times, it's obviously in the bigger agencies, where it is a demotion to them, or it's a stepping stool to them, but it's not where they want to be. You cut a real treasure with a detective who wanted to be in the missing persons department, because that person's working like crazy for the family, or families. What is, well, enforcement, it's a job. And part of their job is solving cases. And with the missing, it may not get solved, during their time in that department.
It's amazing to me that, of course, my perception is that a large majority of the cases that the disappearances that we cover on Unfound are murders. I don't know that for a fact, but that's my perception. And so it's like the homicide department, but not. But homicide, it seems like a lot of police officers want to end up there, but they don't want to end up in missing persons. Yet missing persons and homicide are so close. Is that the way?
But it's the unknown. I do see it that way. But it's the unknown with the missing. They have very few clues, if any, to go on. Whereas most typical homicide cases, where you have a body immediately, they've got a lot to work with.
Right.
But the missing detectives don't have much to work with.
Right. Yeah, of course, in very, very few of the cases that the disappearances that I've covered, there's no DNA or anything like that. Fingerprints, we hardly ever talk about any of that on this program, simply because there is nothing.
Oh, yeah.
It's very rare.
My daughters and I have already said that somebody grabs any one of us, leave DNA at the scene, do whatever you can, cut yourself, do something.
Yeah.
Leave your DNA at the scene.
Right. That's a good point. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Do you think the key to, as far as police maybe getting, you maybe say jaded after a while or something like that, or they just look at it as a stepping stone, do you think that we could get around that if we could better understand the difference between the people who go missing for a few days and come back, and then those people who go missing and never come back? Do you think that's like the main way that we can make an improvement in the investigation of missing persons cases? Because the way I look at it is, in those first few days, it all looks the same. And then at some point, of course, somebody pops up for whatever reason, being alive, and then these other people over here don't pop up at all. Do you think that's the key to all of this?
Not the key.
Okay.
It is worth looking into, but it's not the key. What it is we need the families to be talking with law enforcement, training them on what it is they're going through. Whatever has happened to the missing person has happened, for the most part. The families have to keep living it and living it and living it and living it until it's solved. And so I think the families do a better job at educating law enforcement as to why the cases should be taken seriously in the beginning, why they should be, ongoing investigation, doing whatever possible to, find leads.
Mm-hmm. That's funny you put it. It's almost like the opposite. You'd think it would be the police training or teaching the families, but you're saying it should kind of be the exact opposite.
Well, in an ideal world, it should be the police, but for now, until we get them all trained and a whole mindset reversed, it's got to be the families. It's on the families to train them.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What we're doing. That's why we're using our voices.
Right. And I agree with you. There's no doubt that many of the guests that I've had on my program know way more about missing persons cases than most police officers. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Absolutely. That is certainly true. What is the number one thing police officers need to learn? If we're going to talk about training and training them better and everything, where do you start with that?
Well, making sure that any of the conferences, they go to a lot of training, and any of the training that's being held for law enforcement should include a section on the missing and unidentified persons, but it should also include the families telling stories there, or even putting the program together for law enforcement for these conferences.
Who do you think, the way, and I certainly want to get into what you're doing these days, your responsibilities and everything. Do you think in having 14 years of experience, do you think that you are to the point where, and maybe you've already done this, and of course I want to talk about that, training police officers? Do you think that...
I have spoken.
Please, please go ahead.
I've spoken in front of them many times. Whenever I get a chance, with Missouri Missing, and whenever we have an event, we make sure the law enforcement is there. We make sure they're hearing the stories, and that they're included in all of these things. However I can, I use my voice. I teach constantly, just by talking with people. Okay. You had mentioned an interesting comment, a phrase, in our prior conversation, missing persons cases aren't revenue generating. What do you mean by that? And, I guess what I would say is, homicide investigations aren't revenue generating either. What did you mean by that when you said that? Well, missing persons cases are not revenue generating. They are more revenue depleting for law enforcement agencies. Especially if they're putting on big searches and things like that, and a lot of manpower. It can deplete their revenue pretty quickly. I mean, they run out of money pretty fast on these. As far as homicides and things like, they can be revenue generating, especially if it's, concerning drug deals or guns or, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Right, I see what you're saying there. Okay. And the reason I thought that was interesting, because I've maybe kind of put it a different way. I said that, over time I've said the tough thing about missing persons cases is that if every missing persons case, if they were to get the dogs and the helicopters and out, every time a person disappeared, every police department in the United States would be broke. I mean, at some point, market forces or economics and expenses and everything, come to play, and anything you do in life, and that, I think that's kind of maybe another way of saying, what you're saying is that they have a certain budget that can be used for, and of course we know we get volunteers for searches and et cetera, but some people do need to be paid to be out there, and there's only so much money to go around.
That's true, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that's why we depend on all these volunteer organizations, the well-trained ones, the search and rescue, and people that have been trained and know what they're doing, that are, a real asset to the police force and to the families to get out there and look.
Mm-hmm.
And God bless them, they do it for free.
They do. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Let's talk about the NCIC, which you've already mentioned, NAMUS, which I think everybody knows by now that's listening to this program, and then NECMEC, Center for Exploited Children. I know that I've had conversations with my guests, I know you have too, where many police departments, police officers, investigators, maybe aren't even familiar, for example, with NAMUS. Is that a training issue, or is that just some sort of, local police just not caring about what's going on at the national level? How do you see it?
It depends on the agency, depends on the detective. I've seen it where it's a lot of ego. I mean, they don't even want to bring the FBI into cases. And that's a lot of ego. They want to be the one to solve it.
Right.
In other cases, I have told sheriffs in small towns how to get a silver alert or how to get an amber alert. You know, they may never in their entire careers have a missing person.
Yeah.
But all that's not falling under the radar. You know, name it. I mean, obviously everybody knows who Neckneck is, but you know, Namath isn't going to fall under their radar unless they've gone to a training and have learned about it. You know.
Yeah. I know I had a case of late 2017 was the disappearance of Dowell Phillips in Tennessee, and at the point that I found out about his disappearance, he wasn't on the Charlie Project, he wasn't on Namath. You couldn't find any, news stories on his disappearance at all. And in talking to his wife, Missy, it took forever for her to be able to get him on Namath. He's on there now. But it did seem like it was a tug of war type of issue where the local police just did not want to have anything to do with getting him into any national database at all. You run into that a lot?
Yeah, a lot of times, I always let the families know about Namath, and then I have them enter their case into Namath, and that's for multiple reasons. One, it empowers them during a time when all control is taken away from them. And two, they know that case better than anybody, and, they'll know how to answer those questions and fill it in completely, whereas, a police officer or somebody from does not know those answers. Mm-hmm. But I always try to get them to do it first, and sometimes what happens is they get the case in there, the case doesn't go live until Namath can verify it with law enforcement, and at that time, law enforcement won't give their approval. And I think many of those are just the ego thing. They want control of the case.
Right. I think it's ego too, and that point has certainly come up with some of the guests that I've had on the program for sure. Ego, absolutely, sure. Okay.
Well, and I think there's another reason too. A lot of police won't, which was new to me, it was something I discovered in 2005, is that a lot of news stations won't run a story on a missing person until police give their permission.
That's true. Yes.
And then you fast forward to all the social media and all these people, and I don't want to down all these people that are trying to help on the internet, but they do interfere a lot of times, and they shouldn't be doing that, where they're calling the police. So one little law enforcement agency doesn't have departments, per se. They're all their time answering phone calls from the public who, have nothing to do with the case, aren't related to the person. They're sitting there having all their hours taken up just answering calls for stupid questions. I just think like some of them don't want national exposure.
Yeah.
It's simply because of that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, of course, I'm sure you've also encountered over your years that, we have people that get involved in these cases that even they're involved and maybe they don't have the family's best interest in mind. They're just involved so they can find out stuff for their own devices. Just so they
usually so they can take it back to some crime board and get an attaboy from the other people that they got a piece of information that nobody else got.
Right. That's right.
So they get a slap on the back.
That's right. That is totally true. That is totally true. They're in it so they can seem like the experts and get attention for themselves. That is certainly true, Maureen, and that is rampant.
I know.
Yeah.
And there's also the reward mongers, and they think they're going to solve all these cases and get their reward. And in fact, they're counseling the families and telling them, "Oh, you have to put a reward up. You have to put a reward up." I talk with families. I'm like, well, it's kind of your choice, but if I were you, I wouldn't waste my time trying to have fundraisers to up and reward money, because I have friends out there with $100,000 rewards out and have gotten not one tip.
Absolutely true.
Because of it. Yeah.
I could
Don't
not.
waste your time on that.
You and I are totally on the same page as regarding that, Maureen, for sure. Rewards. It seems anyway that rewards do not solve missing persons cases. They just don't.
Nope.
No.
Nope.
Let's talk a little bit more about the families. The way you've seen it over the last 14 years, what do families do wrong in those initial hours and days? What have you experienced? What is the main thing that you see families who have a missing loved one, whether it's a child or sister, brother, whoever, what's probably the biggest mistake they make?
Trusting people on the internet. Everybody knows to go to the internet first to get the word out. And all of a sudden you got all these people, some of them aren't trying to do good, but, also ran into all the ones that are just, whatever reason, they'll do things like, I'll put up a page for your missing loved one, and they'll put up the page, and then they'll kick the family off of it so that they can, discuss badly about the family, type of stuff goes on. The very first thing I always say to families is, your case, you own your case. Nobody else does. Not law enforcement, not the internet, not the media. You own your case, and you have to have complete control over every aspect of it from the beginning.
Yeah.
But usually I don't get to that in that fast enough time period.
Yeah. Right. I think that's a good point too. I think not a lot of families that I've talked to, but at least a few, enough to talk about it, is that they do end up trusting the wrong people. People who look like they're trying to help, but once again, going back to what you said before, the only reason they're getting involved is so they can find out stuff for themselves. And
that's true. And I don't want anybody not to get involved, because God bless these good-hearted people that have been very respectful of the families and empathize with them and can find out information.
Yeah.
But these other ones that come in and interfere with the cases and have no idea about the system, have no idea what they're talking about, but then make themselves sound like they're an expert advocate or something.
Yeah.
They don't realize that they're wasting precious time for these families.
I guess what we're saying for families out there, and we're going to get to this next question will be relevant to this, is that not everybody is as they seem. No matter how nice they may be and everything, it's better to trust but verify instead of just believing somebody just because they want to be involved. You have to be a little discerning and a little bit discriminating when it comes to that.
Yes, very true. And some of the families have caught on. I think the public is following these cases on the internet more. So, before they have a loved one missing. And so they've gotten a little bit wiser, I'm thinking.
I think so, too. I think that's probably changed. It's one of those things with the internet. It's both a help and a hindrance, because in the help, it's easier to network and get the word out, but also it does bring the kooks out.
It does.
And hopefully a person like you and people who do what you do, what I do, of course, my assistants, we can help these people in trying to keep them away from those people who, don't have the family's best interests in mind. And I've done that, on a few occasions for sure. And I'm sure you have too.
Oh, yeah. Too many times to count.
Yes. Of course, we haven't even talked about scammers. And people saying, give me $10,000 and I can go get your son or daughter. I mean, I've had to tell people, the way I feel about it, maybe you do too, Maureen, is a lot of times we have to be the bad guy. We're the one that has to say to them, whatever that person's telling you, and they're promising you this and promising you that, it's not true. I know it's going to make you feel bad, but it's not true. It's a scam. This person's lying to you. How many times have you been put in that situation?
A lot of times.
Yeah.
A lot of times, especially with the blackmailers. So, yeah.
Yeah. Is there any way any families can prepare for a disappearance? Because it seems to me that, of course, every time it happens, people, they're thrown into this tornado. It seems totally out of their control. Maybe that's the way you felt back in 2005. But is there any way that a family can prepare for it? Maybe if they, just as an examples, maybe if they have somebody who, a son or daughter that's into drugs that maybe disappears once in a while, as we know some addicts do, and then come back. Maybe other situations, maybe they have a sister or brother who's in a turbulent, marriage, and there's some domestic abuse. Is there any way a family, can prepare if something, should happen?
Well, because every situation is different, you can't ever completely prepare. As far as the domestic violence, if you have a loved one in a domestic violence situation, or if you yourself are in a domestic violence situation, you should be documenting it and documenting your cannot, access your documentation. A video done at a friend's home on their computer would probably be the ideal way. That way, if something happens, at least the police know where to begin. I think, other situations, as far as children, obviously, you have to have best practices in place at all times. Like I tell my children when they were little and my kids and my grandkids now, I said, if we're out in the public, I said, if I can't see your eyes and you can't see my eyes, you're not safe. And, just use some practices like that, that kids know how to get out of any kind of situation should they get into it, or at least try, to get out of it. As far as teenagers, I know there's a lot of families that don't call the police if their child runs, but they need to each time, because each time those kids need to be found fast. I used to think that this human trafficking stuff was just a lark and everybody was using it as an excuse, or as a way of saying, well, this must have been what happened to my loved one. Now I'm seeing that's not the case, that it is rampant out there. And especially these teenagers and these traffickers know what kids to look for. They're looking for the bipolar kid, they're looking for kids with any kind of mental health issues. They're looking for the kids that are on drugs. They're looking for the kids that they can groom and get out of the house. Maybe it's I won't even go there. I was going to say, it could be a bad home, and they're trying to entice the child out of it. It doesn't even have to be a bad home. They may convince the kid that it's a bad home and entice them out. But these teens need to be looked for immediately.
Of course. Right.
Parents need to know as much as they can, but the kids are really good at hiding it, the social media that they're on. They need all the best practices and safety tools out and be using them with their teens.
Okay.
And basically, they need to know height, weight, things like that. I don't think most of us know. In fact, Missouri Missing, we rarely anymore put on a height and weight because it's kind of, one family member may say one height and one weight, and another one says another height and another weight.
Yeah.
And I really don't think the public even knows heights and weights unless it's a 7-foot man who's 1,000 pounds.
Yeah, it really sticks out. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
That's kind of silly, but I think the parents need it for the police. That's accurate.
Yeah. Okay.
Accounting of weight and distance and things like that. As far as knowing what your child had on, we should all know that. Man, I was probably the worst at that. That was my greatest fear. If a child went missing, they'd ask me what my child had on. I probably would have blown it. But there's also, these families, and we had discussed this, ahead of this program. These families are in major trauma, and the first thing that goes in major trauma is short-term memory. And, they maybe ask things that they're not going to remember. They can't. It's gone. It's gone in their mind. They cannot dredge it up. But it may pop up 5-10 years from now or never. So whatever ways families can think about things like what might go out of my mind, I see lots of pictures. I used to get so mad at my daughters. I always take pictures of kids constantly. I said, God, just let them play, the pictures. And now I'm like, yeah, take a picture. So those pictures are the best thing.
Okay. Let's move on to the law. You've already mentioned you tried to get this law, Billy's Law, passed. Why don't you explain how that all came about?
That came about on MySpace back in the very beginning.
Wow.
Jan Smolinski, Billy's mom, reached out to me. And she started asking me a whole series of questions. And then everybody else was kind of piping in. We kind of had just a group of us. And kind of became apparent that we were all kind of going through the same thing as far as our loved one being put in the NCIC or even knowing about the NCIC and knowing about names hadn't quite come about at that point that it did. And so all of Jan's questions kind of evolved into Billy's Law. So Billy's Law would make it where law enforcement and coroners and medical examiners have to put their law enforcement, the missing persons cases into NamUs, and coroners and medical examiners have to put their unidentified into NamUs. And it all makes sense. Where we can mess them up at. Right now we've got probably over 40,000 unidentified remains all over the country that aren't in any system or in any proper system. We have missing persons aren't in any system. It doesn't help if a law enforcement agency takes a report and then doesn't put them in the NCIC.
Right.
Then only that agency knows that person is missing. The city next to them has no idea if they encounter that missing person that there's even a report on that missing person, unless they're in the NCIC.
But as you said, though, and so this, you tried to get this law passed, and it sounds like a great idea. Why didn't it get passed?
Politics, I guess. I heard from one politician, that one person who works with politicians all the time, he said that the one senator that denied us, he said he may have been all for the law. He said, but what happens is all of them will agree to say yes, yes, yes. Everybody gets to say yes, and they look in front of the constituent, and one person has to take the fall. And that way, the bill doesn't get passed.
You're going to have to explain that to me again. I think maybe for the listeners as well, because I don't know if any politicians listen to this program. I know it's like talking about like theoretical physics, but it just seems like so obvious. And I realize we're not here to get into politics on this program, but it would seem like that would be something that all sides could agree on. But you're saying that they don't.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Well, they have to answer to the law enforcement agencies. If the law enforcement isn't for it, then they're getting heat from the law enforcement. I don't know why coroners and medical examiners wouldn't be all for it. I don't know. Again, everybody thinks they own the case.
Yeah.
I know.
Okay.
But yeah. Yeah, I'm not going to even go back in and try to describe that political stuff again, but it made a lot of sense after it was told to me that that's probably what took place.
Okay.
So.
All right. So you think that there was some blowback from law enforcement about this law that seems to make a lot of sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's more work for them. They have to do an additional entry into something, so more work.
Okay. How long did it take to once? And I'm somewhat familiar with Billy Smolinski's case. I know that it's still unsolved, and maybe something's coming to me at some point. Somebody got taken to court for defamation. Was that case as well?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Yeah, Jan Smolinski's been the only one in trouble for her son's disappearance.
Okay. All right.
Sweet little Jan.
Okay. I have to admit I've never spoken to her, but that seems to be.
You'll have to.
Okay.
You will have to.
Okay. All right. I will.
You're in for a real treat. No.
All right. We'll try to make that happen for sure. But it just I know that I've read, although I can't tell you the certain circumstances of his disappearance, but I do remember reading. I do know that it was unsolved, and I remember reading something that ended up being a defamation case of some type. Okay. But how long did it take from the first idea of this to even get it in front of anybody that could vote on it? How long did that take?
Oh gosh. I'd have to go back and look at the years, but that was probably, let's see, 3 or 4 years.
Okay. Okay, 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I would have thought it would take longer than that, but 3 or 4 years. Okay.
Well, you got to remember the idea was going through Jan's head ahead of that, but that was ahead of Namus, and then Namus came on, and then everything just clicked, and that's when it started.
Okay.
When Billy's all started.
Any chance of trying again to get something like that done?
We're trying to go state by state. Right now, it's just too hard to get anything passed in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, ideally it would be full, but now we're having to go state to state and get it passed that way.
Okay. Which
takes a lot longer, but at least there are states now that have to input into NamUs.
Okay. Let's talk about your maybe daily or weekly duties with these different titles and responsibilities that you have. What is a typical week for you regarding working with families or any of the volunteering and coordinating and everything that you do? What's a typical week for you?
I never know what's going to happen from week to week. How many people may contact Missouri and need our help, or other people will flag me on a missing persons case to make me aware of the case, and wanting me to reach out to the family. We try not to ambulance chase, but when you've got a lot of people trying to get you to talk to the family, you go ahead and do it. But basically, we just talk with them, find out what's going on, see what's taking place. You see if they need a flyer made. Flyers aren't our big thing. We're not these that are trying to get the flyer up first. We're not that. Although we certainly believe in the awareness, getting the awareness out there. Our concern is the family. How are you doing? What can we do for you? If you need to call us at 1 a.m, call us. We're there for the support side of the family.
Mm-hmm. Now we
sometimes we go out and get the media for them, or we'll set up a vigil, or it varies on each case.
Yeah, right. And we have to remember that you have a job that is outside of the missing persons community, like Oh.
I do.
A weekly job. So
I
this
have 2 jobs outside. Of it,
two outside. Oh, 2 jobs. Okay.
That's right.
Okay. And so you're doing this on top of your regular salaried job.
Correct.
Oh, wow.
Correct. I get no salary from Missouri
Right.
Mission whatsoever.
Right. Okay. How many hours would you say you put in a week for your efforts with working with families? How many hours a week?
Oh gosh. And again, it just depends.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say 10, 15 sometimes hours. And some weeks it may not be as much, but then I have other things I'm doing, like the big search, and I'm putting in time on conference calls and planning for the next search, and things like that. So.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about what is the big search.
Big search. The big search started with Free International in Las Vegas. And then Veronica's Voice brought it here. Veronica's Voice is a nonprofit here in Kansas City. They brought it here, and we just had our second one in October. I've been part of the leadership management team on both the first year brought here and the second year. And this is all in partnership with Class Kids and Free International, and then organizations here are partnering with Veronica's Voice. So Missouri Missing is partnering with Veronica's Voice. So what we do is, once a year in the fall, we take 3 days, it's a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and we have command centers. First year we had 1 command center. Last year we had 2 command centers, one on the Kansas side, one on the Missouri side. And we gather intel, and we have a booklet of, I think it's 20 children are in the booklet, missing children, and we've kind of coordinated that with a lot of different people as to, who to put in the book. And we get volunteers from the community. We had close to 300 volunteers this last time, and we go out in teams, and they take the booklets with them, and they go to the areas that we've mapped out for them from our intel, and they go into, it could be hotels, it could be stores, Quick Trips, gas stations, things like that, libraries, all sorts of places, retail stores, and they go in and they show the book. And through that, through the past 2 years, we have recovered, I want to say it's been about 31 kids.
Wow.
I know. It's amazing. It really is amazing. We generate a lot of tips. So when our weekend ends, it doesn't end. Tips are being generated. Kids are still being found because of the tips. All tips go to law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty amazing thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Sounds
it's
like it.
spreading
Wow.
out. It's starting to go out to other cities now. Hopefully it will be all over the country at some point.
Right. Wow.
We're kind of the guinea pigs because we were the second city. Now, I know Las Vegas, I think they go out on a monthly basis and do it. But they don't have to contend with as much as we do in the Kansas City area. Las Vegas, we have, North Las Vegas, and Henderson. So they only have 3 municipalities to deal with.
Yes.
Whereas when you get into a big metro area, and this was a real shock for them when they came in the first year, they couldn't believe how many jurisdictions you have to deal with.
Yes. Having lived in Las Vegas, you're right. It's things are a little simpler there. In addition, is that in Las Vegas, even though it's a growing city and it's been growing for like 30 years now, there's still a defined area of the city. You know, you're either in the city or you're in the desert, whereas most other American cities, it's like you have the city and then you get into the suburbs and then the municipalities and everything, and it's just not like that in Las Vegas at all.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were shocked. So Kansas City's really the big guinea pig on the big search and taking it into other big metro areas.
And once again, how long has this been going on?
For Kansas City, this will be we just finished up our second one.
Okay.
So we've only done it twice now.
Okay. And when did it start in Las Vegas?
You know, I knew you were going to ask that. I can't remember what year they started it.
Okay.
You can get on Free International, and it'll be on there.
Okay.
I can't remember now. They've been doing it for a couple of years. I mean, obviously, they wanted to feel comfortable before they took it anywhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are people listening to this, and as I've already told you, in 2020, one of my main concentrations is going to be, urging listeners to get more involved. Instead of just being listeners to the program on, every Friday, to get more involved with searches and, learning even just anything. Learn how to do searches on the internet, go through databases, get out there, whatever they think that they can do instead of just listening to the program. That's going to be a main concentration of mine for 2020. How would you, from your point of view, what is the easiest way for people to get involved?
The best way to get involved is to, one, educate yourself on the missing persons laws as they currently stand in your state. Talk to your local law enforcement. See what their protocols are and see if they've got those in writing. Because a lot of times they'll just think they're supposed to be doing it this way, and there may be no protocol whatsoever. Find out a little bit about that. Really listen to the families, on the internet. See what they're going through. Obviously, it's, we want to find the missing person, but there's a lot more components to this. The family and the loved ones of the missing that need care, too. So I think it's really looking at your own skills. If you're better, not on the empathy side, but better on the research side, stick to that,
Okay.
And find out about the different databases. Find out about, the system and how things work and what happens once a report is made. Or what happens once a body is found.
And see if there's any, grassroots missing persons groups in their area. Of course, people that are in cities maybe are going to have an easier time doing that than people, out in the country. But how about that?
Yeah, but even the people out in the country, they usually have a little bit of a bigger city somewhere near them, not a huge city, but, something. And there's a lot of things. A lot of these places have human trafficking organizations now, anti-trafficking organizations. So if that's, something of their interest, they're going to their meetings. See what they can do for the Parents of Murdered Children groups. They're everywhere, rural, doesn't matter where. But a lot of those, began as a missing person. They can learn a lot from that. If they have opportunities to attend any kind of training, do it.
Okay. You've been at this for 14 years. Would you say things have improved since you got involved? I'd like to think that they are, but we still know that a lot of people go missing. Do you think that the efforts of you and so many other people, and then, of course, me more recently, are we making a dent, in this? Because as I think everybody now knows, the number of missing people who are missing, it's an incredible number. Are we making a dent?
Are you making a dent? I think you are for the families in that you're giving them as far as making a dent, the numbers are going to go up because we're now, like, there's so many missing that weren't put into the NCIC, that are just sitting in all these little law enforcement agencies' drawers, and now they're starting to come forward more. And I think it's because of all the talk, that we keep talking about the missing. And I think that talk is generating them to do what they, should be doing, getting them in to the NCIC. So those numbers are shooting up a little bit because of that. But we still have so many missing that are not reported anywhere. So.
Okay.
But yeah, you guys are making a difference. Don't ever think you're not. Don't anyone ever think you're not making a difference. As long as you're not bringing more trauma to the families, and as long as you're educating people, as long as you keep the talk going about the missing and unidentified, you're doing wonders for us.
Okay. Any final words, Maureen, before we conclude this interview? I think we've had a wide-ranging interview with a lot of good tips, but I think we've talked a little bit of theory here as well. Any final words before we complete this interview?
Well, I would like to tell the families to make sure they're making use of podcasts like yours. Make sure they listen to some of these podcasts first, not yours, but others. Well, yours too, but I mean, others. Make sure to see how they're treating people, because, what I noticed with you was tremendous respect for the family.
Thank you.
And not all these places are doing that. So I would tell the families, if you're thinking of doing a podcast, really look into it first.
Right.
And see what they're doing. And what are they doing on the back end? Are they tearing you down, or they didn't care anything about you, Just look it over before you sign up for one of these. But, yeah, for you, I would say do it. Any of the families out there that know me, do it.
Yeah. I agree with you. I agree with you, but I also know what you're saying is that, there are quite a few guests who are behind the scenes. They like the publicity that some other programs can give their missing loved one, but on the other hand, they get upset, when it's like, they did that and they didn't even contact me, didn't even ask me. So, they got this wrong, they got that wrong, they didn't talk about this, they didn't talk about that. And it does tick some of them off sometimes. Not all of them are ticked off, but I can't tell you, would never mention the guest name, but I can tell you that one particular guest, the reason she came on the program is she was so ticked off of how many other programs were covering this missing persons case and weren't consulting her.
Yeah.
That's the reason she found Unfound to come on and do an interview, because these other people just would not talk to her. They just wanted to do it on their own. Yeah.
Or they'll have the families on, and then they'll do a dirty surprise, like bringing a psychic on, and they haven't even asked that family their views of a psychic.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yes, as everybody knows, we don't do psychics on Unfound, so everybody knows how I feel about that. Yeah, right. Right. Yes. Before you go, why don't you just, Maureen, once again say all of the organizations and your positions in those organizations before we complete this interview, if you could.
Sure. I am Executive Director of Communications for Missouri Missing, which is a 501c3 based out of Jefferson City, Missouri. The name is Victim Advocate for Kansas. I went through Academy to get that title. It's not a self-proclaimed title. On the leadership management team of the Big Search KC. And as far as missing, that's about it.
Okay. Well, that's plenty, Maureen, especially considering you have two other jobs that you have that are not involved with the missing persons community. Maybe you don't know this. I think most of my listeners now know this, that, what I do this full time, reporting on and doing at least some investigation of, anything that I think can help the families when I end up contacting them or they find me or one of my assistants. So, you're doing quite a bit despite, having other work, to do. So, and I appreciate, you're welcome. And I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome, Maureen.
And that was my interview with Maureen Reintjes, missing persons volunteer, advocate, and coordinator. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. What I thought was so important about interviewing Maureen is that she has a regular job like most of you do. She has to make time to give to the missing persons community. But Maureen has still become a leader, a coordinator, and important enough that even one of my assistants said, "Hey Ed, you have to interview her." What I'm saying is not everyone needs to be like me, a guy who does this full time. You can still have an impact only working part-time for the missing persons community and its families. Please remember that. As for what we talked about, these are the 3 points that stuck out to me. Number 1, you heard it from Maureen herself. One of the reasons missing persons cases don't get investigated well is because they aren't revenue generating. And I think her point in comparing this to murder cases is that many times murders are attached to wider ranging crimes, drugs, guns, organized crime, etc. And the solving of them can bring in additional grants and money for continuing to solve and prosecute those crimes. Whereas missing persons cases, as we've learned, although they certainly can be attached to drugs and prostitution, they are mostly personal crimes. To remind you of what I've said in the past, relationships are the number 1 cause of disappearances. Well, solving crimes involving relationships is just, as Maureen said, non-revenue generating. And ultimately, all justice comes down to dollars and cents. Number 2, if you're taking an interest in missing persons cases, just so you can get personal attention for your YouTube channel and your blog and to gain notoriety, and you want to become somebody, then you're doing this for all the wrong reasons. And really, you're only a hindrance, not a help. All you're really then doing is using the victims and their families for your own benefit. I'll say it again. Theories don't solve cases. Yes, we theorize because we're human, but getting involved, digging for information, trying to find out if something is true or not, and not publicizing it until you are 100% sure is the only way to conduct reporting in not just the missing persons community, but anywhere. In fact, the big problem with all media in the U.S. right now is there is more money to be made voicing opinions than actually digging for facts. We can't let that happen with missing persons cases. And number 3, families need to learn very quickly that eventually they'll be responsible for getting their own missing persons case solved. You heard it straight from Maureen herself, and she has way more experience than I do, even though I've figured that out as well. But to be clear, Maureen is not saying the police, quote-unquote, don't care. They do. But police work is all about solving the crime today, not the one from 10 years ago. Catching the criminal today keeps the police out of the news, whereas crimes from 10 years ago aren't in the news anymore anyway. Out of sight, out of mind. Now, if the suspect in a disappearance from 10 years ago comes in, sits down, and confesses, sure, the officer on duty will take the report, put the person in handcuffs, and escort him to jail. Other than that, police departments won't do much. In fact, as you heard, law enforcement got in the way of Billy's Law because it would cause them to have additional work. This is why the missing persons community needs people like you to help these families navigate all of this, because they can't do it all on their own. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Dentzel, and you've been listening to Unfound.